celebrating the 30th anniversary of the DEFA Film Library at UMass Amherst. I always forget things, so I have some notes here. But basically, there is too much to talk about with this film. So I will try to sketch in a few things, and I'm sure that it will leave you with questions and really interesting things to discuss later. So The Dove on the Roof stands out for a multitude of reasons. The first being that it was one of very, very few East German feature films to be directed by a woman. Filmed in the fall and winter of 1973, it was to be the debut film of Iris Gusner, who had been sent to Moscow to train at the world-famous geek film academy there, and had come back as a bit of a young star. One of a small group of movies that responded to the loosening of artistic restrictions when Erich Honecker came into power in 1971, the film and the young director received a lot of advance press. There was a lot of buzz around this movie. Instead of a much touted triumphant release, however, after its approval screening at the DEFA studio, which is when they showed the films to all the bigwigs in the studio, and it either got approved or didn't, the film was rejected. As Gusner recalled in an interview with film historian Ralf Schenk, they hadn't said clearly that the film was banned. Instead, they said it still needed work. The studio itself had no interest in losing a film because it wasn't beneficial either politically or financially. We were therefore given the opportunity to make changes, which they started doing madly, trying to get the film accepted. Despite the efforts of Gusner and others to adjust scenes in response to the criticism they had received, however, it was never approved for release. Instead, it was kept under lock and key in what was referred to at DEFA as the Giftkammer, the chamber reserved for poison. The film then went through an almost unbelievable 37-year saga, which included 2 disappearances, bad damage to the sole existing copy, and 2 efforts at reconstruction and restoration. The version we have today was beautifully restored, first found and then beautifully restored by the DEFA Foundation in Berlin in 2010. And Gusner has said that it corresponds to what she recalls having created. You'll see it is missing sound in a spot or 2, and most tragically, it was impossible to save the color emulsions. So although the film was made in 1973, and despite the director's wishes, plans, what we will see tonight is in black and white. The plot takes place on a large-scale construction project. In the early 1970s, there was a huge housing shortage in the GDR, and there were many of these very large-scale projects, Plattenbau projects, which are more or less correspond to what in the United States were called the projects, what was built here in the late 60s into the early 70s. The construction supervisor is a young woman who is succeeding and is a model of the freedom that in East Germany women had to get educated and to succeed professionally. But of course, it's a very male-dominated industry. So it brings with it a whole can of worms. And that is basically what the story is about. The Dove on the Roof has been hailed as one of a very small group of films that might be considered as part of an East German new wave. Censorship in East Germany was very concerned with controlling content and form. But as I mentioned earlier, in 1971, Erich Honecker came into power, and one of the things that he proclaimed is that there should be no more taboos in art. Its subject matter for 1973 was incontestably contemporary, as was its form. Indeed, its formal properties were an important part of what made the film unpalatable to censors and older filmmakers in East Germany. Again, in Gusner's words, what differentiated my film from the usual DEFA film was that the story is not told as an uninterrupted linear narrative. Rather, it is a series of scenes that each show something characteristic or essential about a person, a relationship, or a situation. The Dove builds upon the premise that these come together with thoughts and associations like a puzzle in the minds of the viewers. So in rewatching the film for the first time in several years, these last few days, I was struck at how much autonomy and responsibility Gusner leaves to the audience members to put together her story. The older filmmakers, she said, felt the film had political integrity, but found the narrative form impossible. Individual scenes were praised, but in general, many of them found the style of the film alienating. Added to the challenge of how she intended to make the movie, you may also notice what Gusner calls jumps and brittleness in the first third of the film, which were the result of those last-minute edits and cuts that they were desperately trying to make in order to save the film from the censors, and which they made until the last minute when people came in and confiscated all the materials. So there was no ability to kind of tie the bow and do that final smoothing of things, which I'm sure you will notice. I really like this film, and I very much look forward to discussing what I consider a rich, brave, humorous, and beautiful movie with you after the screening.